Welcome to the third tutorial in the video series of Space Unity and the space scene creation, whatever I called it. What was I calling it? Yeah, Space Scene Construction Kit. That's why I also shortened it to just Space Unity, because I can't even remember the name myself. Anyway, the third video, I'm just going to talk about the assets and what's behind the scenes, basically. So I'll start from the ground up. I'll go into the Space Scene Construction Kit folder, which contains, it should be quite neatly anyway, hopefully, sorted out into different folders, a folder structure. That should hopefully make some sort of sense. We've got materials, meshes, prefabs, scripts, shaders, and textures. And if we start at the very, from the bottom up, the space scene itself is more or less an empty, just a placeholder object. And under this, in the hierarchy, we've got a lot of the meshes that form the space scene. So if I click on these, you'll see that in this scene view, you can see the meshes for this nebula, for example. It's got that one, this one, it's got a mesh there. So these are just randomly placed hemispheres. And you'll also notice that the center of the hemisphere, the pivot point, is at the 0, 0, 0 position, which is quite nifty, because then that means that you can rotate this object like this without having to worry about it falling out of position. So there is actually a purpose of this. Same thing goes for a galaxy. We've got, let's see where we can find that one. Which is it, that one that I've selected? Yeah, there we go. The galaxy also has the central pivot point, position 0, 0, 0. So as you rotate this one, it'll automatically just float around this space sphere that's been created. Saves you a lot of positioning problems. And let's have a look. Same also goes for, I tell a lie, it doesn't. The planets, obviously, they don't have a central, they have a central pivot point to themselves instead, because then you want to be able to change them around in space. Don't want them floating around at the outer edge of the universe by any means. So I mentioned that these are meshes that form this, and in the project folder under the Space Scene Construction Kit, see, I said it now properly. Well, hey, we've got these meshes here, and you don't really have to. You can add them manually if you want, but the script will dig in here, and based on your settings on whether you have, like, for example, high, low, or medium quality for your planets, it'll pick the right mesh for you, and also for the planet ring sizes and the galaxy hemisphere. There's only one. There's quite low poly anyway. So, and also for the nebula hemispheres, they're so low poly that there's only one version of them. You also got some asteroid meshes, and these are just raw imported FBX files. And the nebulas then, they obviously are textured, and we have a prefab that is based on it. And if I go into the prefab folder, and you remember me doing before when I created using this Space Scene Construction Kit script, you know, it'll create based on these prefabs that are in turn based on the meshes. So let's have a look. It'll grab elements from this Space Scene Elements folder, and you will have the nebula here, and I could basically just drag in a nebula here if I wanted to, and it'll just add another nebula to my scene, and I can just rotate it around the way I want. So that's the prefab, and the prefab itself only has a set texture on it, and you don't just want to have one texture in your scene. So the next folder you want to have a look at is well, we can start with the texture folder, because the materials are based on these textures. It is also categorized or sorted into folders. So you have your asteroid textures, and they come with a diffuse and a normal map for bumpiness. We have flares, which is custom-made flares for this universe. And we have galaxy textures, which are 1024. Let's have a look. Yeah, 1024 textures that I've created. These are all, they've not been hijacked from the internet anywhere. I've painstakingly created these myself with particle effects, and spent quite a few nights creating these. But I will add a lot more galaxies in the future as well. But for now, there's 14 of them. We've got local stars. They're a bit different because they're particle effects, to have them big and shiny. So we don't have any let's have a look. Yeah, it's not much to say. These are just weird looking textures because, as I said, they're particle effects and it handles the alpha a bit strange on them. We've got some moon textures. There's only 5 moons at the moment. That will increase, and they're a bit lower in texture, in resolution than the planets in 1024. You probably want to reduce that in your game as well because it's a bit overkill with 1024 textures for them. And you've got a whole heap of nebula textures of different colors and brightnesses and shapes and all sorts. So I think there are 128 of these, which are 1024 now. So 128 of them, and I plan to add a lot of them as well in the future. So if you buy this package early for a better price, you'll end up with heap loads of nebulas and moons and planets in the future as I update this package. Got some particle textures, a lot of planet textures, and all planets at minimum have a bump map and a diffuse map. So diffuse is your texture, and here we got Earth. Woohoo. And also a bump map and a light map, and the light map is basically the night cities. So the shader will light up the parts of the planet that are in the shaded area with these city lights. And the max size of these are these come with 4096 by 4096, so these are huge textures. I think I mentioned that earlier as well in the introduction. And you probably want to reduce it, especially if the planets are a bit further away and you don't plan to get close to them. You'd want to bump that down in your game later on to 1024 or 512 or whatever, because you'll save both in terms of distribution size and video memory use and load times and all sorts. But for the moment, I've got them all at 4096, and I also ran into some interesting things with Unity running at this. With everything at 4096, because it basically runs out of memory on me. Despite having 24 gigs in this machine, it keeps running out. So for the final distribution, I'm lowering all of these textures to 1024, so you can just hopefully not run into any issues with that. But I've reported a bug as well to the Unity staff to see what happens with that. But again, just huge textures. And you've also got illumination maps, which is not like the city ones, but these are for molten planets where you got lava and stuff. You got illuminating maps, which say this part of the planet should light up, even if it's in dark, because it's lava and volcanoes and stuff. So at the moment there are 40 planets with different textures. You've got different ring textures. They're really thin because they're spread around, and you've got. The one thing that differs is actually the what you see here, the star textures, and I'll mention them as well because I couldn't. Well, I don't think anyone could create a particle system with millions of stars. That just wouldn't make any sense to render all those as particles. I mean, just imagine all the time Unity would have to spend on calculating all the particles in the distance. So what I've done there is a shortcut from the traditional skyboxes. I've actually created 8-sided textures, it's called. Let's go down to just any blue, for example. Bump it up a bit in size. And these are 4096 by 4096 textures if you want to use that resolution. And it's just a whole bunch of stars. And these are seamlessly tileable in any direction. So rather than using a traditional spacebox or skybox with 6 high-resolution textures, you'll just use one single texture for the stars that are in the far background here. So that's the exception to the rule of everything being nice and neatly and customizable. But instead, I've created a whole heap of these combinations. So you've got anything from low star count and different background colors and star count. So there's a whole heap of these textures as well. I'm going to stop using the word heap now before I kill myself. Here we go. So that's the textures, and the textures in turn, they have materials. And to cut a long story short, I was going to say, it's still a long story, but with the nebula here, we created one. I can't remember which one it was, but let's just pick any. This nebula. If I go into the material section and go to nebulas, I can pick any nebula here and just drag it onto this and change it if I want to, like this. Show. and rotate it again if I want to. So materials can be adjusted manually. Same thing goes for the galaxy, which actually has a separate object for the galaxy texture, but I'll go into galaxies and we can change that one. There we go, a new galaxy. And the reason why the galaxy is a bit different is because those scales, the nebulas, I don't really ever scale them, but the galaxies you can scale if you want on this child object.